They just want to party, have fun, They want Pride to be exclusively about that. And for them, politics doesn't mean anything. It's just queerness shouldn't be political for them.
Hi there, my name is Colin Danziba. I'm the host of Metropolis. Today's topic, radical pride. So earlier this month, it was the third iteration of Rad Pride. Sort of a demonstration, a parade. I've seen a lot of different kind of words thrown around to describe it, but essentially it took place earlier this month, and there was quite a lot of police action against Rad Pride. Is that right?
That would be an understatement.
That would be it. That's the whole point of the intro, understate it, and then you're here to state how things were. Our guest today is Celeste Trianon, a trans feminine jurist and activist who runs a legal clinic in the village and also speaks on trans and queer issues nationwide. Thank you for coming on, Celeste.
It's a pleasure.
So yeah, I mean, you said it yourself. It's a bit of an understatement to describe it as as there being some police action against demonstrators. Can you talk about actually? So you were there as a sort of
Observer.
Observer, yeah. You wanted to kind of like.
I was mostly just taking photos from my phone, just walk from like a couple meters distance from the crowd. So I wasn't directly being affected by it, but I wasn't at the front lines. I was more taking photos from the back. But I saw a lot of the action from my own eyes.
Okay, yeah. So I guess a bit of information for our viewers. Rad Pride is this event organized by a group of 6 different queer organizations, and I believe it's co-signed.
I think it's pretty ad hoc, not gonna lie.
It's pretty ad hoc. Okay, yeah, sure. So I mean, the whole thing is it's sort of like a denunciation of the way that like the main Pride is sort of corporatized, right? I think Rad Pride calls themselves anti-capitalist, and there's this kind of very direct political vein in how they organize this kind of Pride event, right? Which is, I think, in my kind of perspective, very at odds with the very kind of clean and corporate and like
it's almost designed
friendly.
to like vibe-wise. It is designed to be we're the bad queers that Fierté Montréal told you she be scared about.
Oh, interesting.
And you can see when like photos of like people wearing pink full face coverings, helmets, dressing up as witches and all that. It's kind of incredible. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of curious. So before you're talking to us about how you've been an observer at the first iteration as well as last year.
I actually participated in the first 2 iterations.
Oh, okay.
But last year I got tear gassed and never again.
Okay. So last year's Rad Pride also tear gas.
Yeah. So the march was allowed to proceed for maybe 15 minutes.
Okay. Wow. I guess so. Yeah. Let's talk about this year's. Kind of run me through the scene. What was it like when you got there? What did you see? What was the mood like?
Absolutely. So I was set up just to the north of Place Émilie Gannemin, which is a little park / plaza right to the west of Montreal's village. Within the park, you had a salsa dancing, family-friendly event. You had kids there, families. It's a joyful place. I would just say from just vibe-wise. And then slightly east from there, you have like the entrance to Montreal's village with a pretty giant like frame saying Festival Fierté Montréal. And then just past there a bus, which actually is a repurposed stage for Montreal Pride, the Vato stage, which is a new stage that Montreal Pride has introduced this year specifically to do more shows within the village. So that was kind of like the overall layout of things. And just to recall, Place Émilie Gannemin is right connected to Berry-UQAM metro station, which is one of the biggest which is the biggest metro station in Montreal. So basically, we're talking about dead center downtown, right adjacent to the village.
Super central.
Indeed. And then eventually, just at say around 9:30, I saw a pretty significant crowd of maybe 100 or 200 people walking eastwards on Maisonneuve and then turning south onto Saint-Hubert, starting to head their way towards the village. And they stopped in the middle of Saint-Hubert, so right near the Hyde Hotel there, and right beside the park there, to do a few speeches. And I'll say I arrived maybe 45 minutes in advance, and the number of riot cops is honestly flabbergasting. They're already starting to block off like nearby streets.
45 minutes.
45
before.
minutes, even an hour in advance. I was trying to find parking then. It was a fun experience. And had all of the folks there, just all of the cops there, all in riot gear, some with shields and their helmets on, all stationed at different corners, as if they're ready to charge at any given second.
Right. They're sort of, it seems they're really preparing for a confrontation.
Absolutely. And I'd say in terms of a cop to protester ratio, it's a 1-to-1.
Okay, yeah. As many cops as there are protesters.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. I'm kind of curious. And how did things like escalate? What was it like when Rad Pride actually started?
So I'd say roughly around maybe 9:45 or something, as some folks were doing speeches from a megaphone right at the middle of Saint Hubert. They were all surrounded 360 degrees by banners. And then after this, folks started marching south towards St. Catherine in order to head east into the village. But the cops wouldn't let them. Saw some photos and videos from other fellow photojournalists, such as William Wilson and Henri René, who have shown that the police have created basically a diagonal flank blocking Saint Hubert south from St. Catherine, as well as St. Catherine east from Saint Hubert. So you had basically a whole flank of cops preventing protesters from making their way into the village. And the entire setup of the cops was designed to push protesters westwards, away from the village, as if the whole goal of the police intervention that day was to prevent protesters from walking into the gay village, a gay space which allegedly and supposedly is supposed to be a safe space for queer people.
Right.
The irony thereof cannot be understated. And that was when a first wave of police brutality broke out, heard some tear gas, cops charging, etc. Eventually, I didn't really see this specifically, but I saw, there was quite a bit of violence at that point. But then the protesters started retreating, heading northwards and back onto Maisonneuve and detouring their way around a couple blocks, and then back towards St. Catherine, marching eastwards. I wasn't there for the whole part, but I saw them marching east on St. Catherine past Barry again, and the crowd just stopped in front of right in front of the Fierté MTL banner in front of the village. So right in front of there. And apparently that was when a lot of the police brutality happened, and the police basically just completely dispersed the crowd into Place Médicament, where the salsa event was happening. And
There was a salsa event happening.
a salsa event with families and kids. And some of those very families and kids were brutalized. There's actually just a testimony just published this morning in CBC of, two parents and their kids aged 1 and 5 respectively, who were tear gassed by the police, almost on purpose. Montreal police has claimed that the windows were actually smashed by protesters, and there's glass bottles thrown, and many alternative theories like this. Some of the photojournalists I saw on site have documented the contrary, which is that the police has pretty much pushed protesters into already pre-broken glass, only breaking it further. So a lot of what the SCM has been saying, I'd argue we need to take that with a grain of salt because of how just everything has been seen and just how violent the police's intervention was. Right. And there's some folks have reported that some photos have been eventually shared in the community of one protester's helmet being basically completely broken by tear gas canisters, to the point where it would basically, that said protester believed that if she didn't have a helmet, her life could have been in danger, or she could have been gravely injured.
Right. Oh my God. This is an incredibly concerning, I guess, series of events.
Some of this is me personally seeing things and recording things. Other parts of this is, photos I've seen, videos I've seen, or other reports I've seen.
No,
so
of course. Yeah.
I'm speaking from a combination of first person and second person testimony here. But what I will say is that I personally would argue that from what I've seen, the bulk of the violence that occurred at Rad Pride this year was instigated by police officers instead of by protesters themselves.
That's really concerning. I mean, especially when you talk about there's kind of this image, I guess, the scene I'm seeing here of them being much like, I mean, already, right, like 45 minutes before to have the place surrounded is sort of like an instigatory thing.
It is.
Afterwards, surrounding people, like trying to shovel people around, throwing tear gas into like a more like public area, you know. But I mean, it's like there was. I wonder, you know. I feel like there's kind of like idea of like, oh, they must be protecting people. What were the protesters up to when this all started? You know?
Honestly, I think if there's one thing that the police was protecting that day, it was Fierté MTL itself. In particular, their stage, which was just less than a block away from the intersection of St. Catherine and St. Hubert, which is where the bulk of the police brutality happened.
Well, I mean, it's incredibly concerning to hear about police using tear gas, that affecting. I mean, it seems like in an indiscriminate way, right?
It is, and
the public
precisely
involved.
because of that reason, tear gas is actually banned as a weapon of war. So,
Yeah,
for instance, it's banned by, I believe, the Geneva Conventions. Yet it is still used in these so-called civilian purposes, which honestly just speaks to how militarized the Montreal police has become, and that's something I also want to touch on, which is the fact that Montreal police has become so damn violent over the past few years, especially I'd argue since the McGill encampment was set up.
The encampments
Well,
for Palestine. I
Yeah,
mean,
about like 15, 16 months ago. I really think that was a turning point in police violence in Montreal, whereas it's become much more complex. And a lot of the deterrent effect of prior class action lawsuits and other forms of community action have just vanished.
No, well, I mean, I'm kind of curious. Like, how does this compare to the other Rad Pride events that you participated
So
in?
2023, we actually marched all the way from Papineau Station. So the last 2 years, Rad Pride was called east of the village and southwest of it. Marched through the entire village, St. Catherine, 2023. Marched through there, marched all the way to that fateful corner of St. Catherine and St. Hubert. Ended up walking northwards, past the Hyatt Hotel, and Place Mignon onto Maisonneuve, walked eastwards, back at that again, and all the way eastwards, basically back towards the starting location. And there's pretty much no brutality almost until like we reached that end point. So I was able to participate at the whole protest there without any issues, and I also took so many good photos of just folks expressing their anger at Pride back here. But last year was the first time, I believe, it was the first explicitly queer protest to get brutalized so badly in Montreal. So I believe that time the police was charging onto a group of protesters with a banner on just near the front of a Rad Pride, and eventually led to tear gas being thrown and I'd say a good part of the crowd being dispersed because a lot of folks were not expecting brutality,
Right.
so didn't come prepared for it. I believe this year one of the biggest reasons why folks, could stay even after getting tear gas was because they came with like personal protective equipment,
Right.
specifically because they knew they'd get tear gassed.
Right. Because of what had happened last year.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like that speaks a lot to the state of police brutality in the city, which is that police brutalities make it even more essential for protesters to take, measures to protect themselves while advocating, which shouldn't be the case. Remember that the right to demonstrate, freedom of assembly, is a fundamental right protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that is a principle which has very limited exceptions, I'll say. That's why we have as controversial as hateful protests are, like, for example, anti-trans or anti-abortion protests, they generally speaking cannot be declared illegal except under fairly limited circumstances.
Right.
Yet we're seeing this happening now to protests that are for human rights, not against.
It's kind of I think there's what's it called, like a double standard as to which types of
It is.
protests are being shut down and which ones are being left.
And I think I need to now talk about certain other occasions, most notably September 20th last year, which was tear gas and brutalized by the police, who were actively, all pointed towards queer kind of protesters, whilst they're letting anti-trans protesters marching in the streets, whilst kind of protesters were blocked off by the cops. Same thing went for 2023, the first one of the biggest anti-trans protests I think the biggest anti-trans protest in the Quebec history, occurred in Montreal on September 20, 2023, and passed right in front of Concordia University's campuses. But that protest, it was explicitly protected by police officers. They were all pointed not towards them, who were spewing hate and are arguing for basically the elimination of trans people from public life. They were pointed towards us, queer and trans counter protesters, defending our human rights.
Right.
And I'll say it, as much as the police wants to proclaim pride or say that they're allies, their actions speak otherwise. I do not believe that there's going to be any trust between police officers and the queer community unless that gets resolved. And do I see it happening soon? No.
Yeah, I mean, there is a long history of sort of like clashes between the queer community in Montreal, right, and the police.
It dates back to the 50s and 60s even.
Yeah.
But some of the more well-known police, some of the more well-known queer rights in Montreal, most specifically trucks in, I believe, 1977.
Yeah, right before the
and the Sex Garage in 1990 were both instances of police brutality followed by protests against that police brutality, which in many cases were brutalized themselves as well.
I mean, I guess to ask the obvious question here, why do you think the police are so tooled against queer communities here in Montreal?
I mean, apart from like the obvious theory of queerphobia, transphobia, etc., I'd really argue too that it has to do with the fact that they just don't necessarily care about human rights. I think that speaks to a broader issue we have in society right now, which is that people do not, especially in the last few years, and especially under the governance of the CAC, which has shown a reckless disregard for human rights as a whole, is just a broader pattern of governments and people in positions of power just no longer caring. We see with, for example, the use of the notwithstanding clause in order to basically smash the civil rights of, in particular, Muslim women. And now it's also being used to prevent trans youth in Saskatchewan from using their chosen names and pronouns. It's been suggested to be used in Alberta to prevent trans youth from getting gender-affirming care. And when you see many other historical uses of the notwithstanding clause, it's always been to crush the marginalized, whether it be for workers back in the 1980s in Saskatchewan with the SGEU Settlement Act, or more recently in Ontario to force a back-to-school mandate for teachers. Pretty much all instances in which the notwithstanding clause has been used has been to demolish civil rights. I really think like a lot of police violence nowadays, specifically in Montreal, also is part of the same vein of actions taken to prevent people advocating for civil rights to actually be able to do so.
Right. Keep those civil rights for a small group of people, and then
Absolutely.
continue to keep a group of people who are outside of it kind of excluded
Absolutely.
from those rights.
And it sure feels like it's a creation of, and now it's like the whole principle of like the law binds some, but does not protect them. And the law protects others, it does not bind them. And I really think that expresses very well what's happening right now with Montreal police.
Right. No, I mean, Montreal police have kind of notoriously been reprimanded by like even like the UN, right, for like human rights abuses. I think this is back when they used to like kettle people. I believe it was like in the 2000s, right? They got
In
hit.
2010s, they only saw it
Yeah.
as a class actions. And I was
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
unfortunately, it seems that money is the only thing they really care about. And the fact that SVM constantly is able to run over budget, yet before gift for it by this municipal administration, really speaks to how these parties are governed. So many of things that are currently being brutalized by the police can actually be resolved through proper community intervention work, through funding community centers and community initiatives, and through giving people the ability to thrive in society without actually needing to giving them the means. And so much of like so-called criminality in Quebec and in Canada, really, and I see much of the Anglosphere as well, focuses on punishing people who are quote unquote committing crimes and quote for their own survival. Like for example, getting food from the grocery store. And say so much of that can be resolved through a proper social safety net.
Right. But then I feel like the way things are going is like the
going-
social safety net is kept for some people, and again, it's about creating that kind of group of people who are excluded from it.
Absolutely. Like I'm thinking about how, like for instance, EI, there's not really a punishment, say if you're married or anything, but social aid payments, which are meant for folks who are completely unable to get a job, or like who are, basically like a last resort financial aid from the Quebec government. That if you're married or even just in a common law union, you're gonna end up having your payments slashed by a very significant portion, which is such a profound injustice, yet is completely tolerated because our society is designed around this.
Right. So I guess to set the scene, we have here in Montreal this police force has a history of being sort of anti. I mean, of course, for once, racist. anti.
I mean, just instances of racial profiling are so commonplace in
Right,
Montreal
yeah.
that I know of like a fellow lawyer, Fernando Belden, who is able to teach courses about racial profiling and the law in pretty much all the law schools across Quebec.
Right,
That's
right.
how severe it is, to the
Right,
point where like we've got full academic courses about this phenomenon and full-blown legal clinics, like in this case, the Clinique Juridique de Saint-Michel,
course,
which have specific programs dedicated to
Right.
countering said
Shows
profiling.
you how sizable that kind of a issue is. But so I was just saying, Montreal police have this history of being sort of not really for human rights, not really for the rights of black, brown, and other racialized peoples, and on top of that, as well as queer people. I kind of want to bring things back to talking about Fierté, right? Like the main kind of like this thing that both Wild Pride, which happened this month, and Rad Pride are sort of positioning themselves against. But like, I guess how do you see, like, why is it that the cops protect Fierté and not the other ones?
I think really it's because Fierté Montréal represents certain kind of like the quote-unquote respectable gay. You know, the type who like will happily integrate into a lot of the very like mainstream societal paradigms in which we live right now. Brings me back to a lot of like fights, for example, in the United States in the 1970s, back when like the quote unquote respectable gays wanted nothing to do with racialized trans women and people who were actually fighting on the ground for their rights. And how this split has really, this schism still exists today, whereas these respectable gays, they want to party and have fun without necessarily having to advocate for their rights. For them, queerness has become completely apolitical since
It's just a lifestyle.
exactly
Yeah.
since like a gay marriage has been legalized some 20 years ago in Canada. So we're talking about basic community which has not really faced a lot of attacks on its civil rights in the last 20 something years, except in limited circumstances. Yet they just want to party, have fun. They want pride to be exclusively about that, and for them politics doesn't mean anything. It's just queerness shouldn't be political for them.
That's kind of interesting.
Yet then you have like the dirty queers, quote unquote, which, these are I'm just saying it this way, but like I consider myself one of those dirty queers too. We're the folks who've been let down by a lot of like such institutions and such paradigms. Like, for example, we're talking about all the lesbians who've been completely alienated by Montreal Pride and how their program is focused and geared primarily towards gay men. All the trans people who've been excluded or even faced transphobic incidents at Montreal Pride. We're talking about very folks, folks of color who've never seen themselves seen within such an institution, which is primarily hired or contracted with people of color and indigenous folks for the sake of actually just getting, pretty much for the sake of just their own popularity, I guess. I know.
Sure.
Like, or for the sake of, not appearing as if they were a white-centric organization.
I think there's something really interesting there that you're saying about like now that like since I think it's interesting that you posit this kind of development from the legalization of gay marriage, right? Where I would imagine before gay marriage was legalized in Canada, it was a political thing, right? It was sort of this like political struggle, right, for your rights and
Absolutely.
stuff. And then since then, it's sort of like I think of it as like you know how like there's that thing about race is like sort of like this fluid construct, right? About how like before Irish people, Italians were outside of whiteness, but
Yeah.
then over time became a part of it, right? And then of course like they kind of themselves have begun to kind of be part of that dominant kind of identity group. And to me, there's something similar, I think, at play here potentially. With
Honestly, I think so, especially with the gays, the G's in particular, really, integrating into, a lot of the hierarchies which are already pre-existing within, I'll just say, like, our broader social system
Sure, yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
Canada, in
Yeah.
Quebec specifically. Whilst you still have a lot of folks, like trans folk, who are still, within the margins, who are clearly who still face wage gaps, which are quite extraordinary. Like, for instance, there's Trans Pulse survey 2019 showed that trans people in Canada earn about 53% of the income of an average Canadian.
Right.
And then we have
53?
53%.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
wage gap. 53% when
Wow.
like for women it's more in like the 80% range, etc.
Right.
For trans people it's 53%. And then you can push it further when it comes to, in particular with Stats Canada even has found some statistics whereas around 39% of trans people in Canada earn in the bottom 20%,
Okay,
which is concerning.
no, of course.
Yet, I think a lot of this comes back to being power dynamics fueled primarily by poverty, fueled by systemic discrimination, leading to poverty, and the power dynamics too within Pride and the queer, like broader rainbow circles as well. Because I will say, gay men very much are at the top of like the QS LGBTQ plus,
Sure.
rainbow because of the fact that they're much less socioeconomically disadvantaged, and even in some cases argue cisgender straight women.
Yeah. No, because I guess there's something at play there where like just as I guess as like in just terms of pure identity, like a proximity to whatever like we imagine as this kind of dominant like identity group, let's say like cishet white men, right? Like I think gay men have the closest proximity to that, right? And which allows for maybe this kind of transference. Not all the time, of course, but to me that's where I look at it, I think to explain this kind of phenomenon of this group of people who no longer see Pride, Fierté as political, but instead as just a opportunity to party. Yeah.
I mean, like Montreal Pride has always kind of been like that organization which has tried to be more or less a party ever since it was founded some 20 years ago.
Okay.
And I'd argue the same thing's happening. It's like you have a lot of like more historical, pride parades and marches in Montreal. And back dating to the 90s, when you see the photos of them, like archival photos, it just is so much more political as nowadays. You have banners from like groups like ACT UP Montreal and a lot of like historical queer advocacy groups like that, which were taking up space at the time. It wasn't a sanitized parade. Yet now it feels that the official Pride parade feels more like the St. Patty's parade.
Wow. Yeah.
Rather than an actual, Pride march or queer march.
Right.
I mean, that also brings me to why, like, back in 2012, we had the first Like March in Montreal because of how Montreal Pride has oftentimes not been a safe space for lesbians and the queer femmes. Yet, and later on, 2014, we had the first Trans March as well because of at least the first documented one I could track back down for almost the same reasons how Montreal Pride would exclude these groups. I know, like, historically, Montreal Pride has also tended to appropriate some of these initiatives. Like, for example, I believe they tried to appropriate the Trans March in 2015. They also successfully appropriated the Dyke March for a few years between 2012 and 2018. Yet that has...
by appropriate, you mean like they kind of like mimic
They
it?
did their own.
Right, of course.
Just like Toronto Pride, in a way.
Yeah.
Yet, it just sure feels that they have completely, it's like, even though they aren't doing like such explicit appropriation of community protests and events anymore, it just sure feels like they don't really care,
I have a question. This might like for me when we're talking about things like this kind of wage gap, right, for like trans people in Canada. I wonder like what I feel like there's some part like some corporations must see that and they imagine themselves as like let's try to fix this, right? And that's to me is one of the drivers of this kind of like corporate like support for like pride in some kind of sense, right? Where they want to be like, no, these kinds of social injustices that exist, we want to make sure that within our company they're sort of addressed. But I'm wondering how does that kind of like how does that kind of go hand in hand with this kind of corporatization of pride we're seeing, right?
I think overall my biggest fear though is that these corporations messages, of course, like support and solidarity sure can start by being visible, yet it cannot just be that. It might also be reflected in, for example, offering benefits to to all couples regardless of the different members of said couple's genders.
Sure.
Offering benefits to all sorts of different family structures, even if we're talking, for example, of a throuple instead of a couple.
Right.
Offering benefits to trans people, for example, so that they can actually access gender-affirming surgeries the same way how their colleagues can access like other forms of healthcare, Making sure that folks have access to like all sorts of, just means to be able to just best live their lives. I'd really argue that there needs to be a focus on that specifically here.
No.
And that's something I feel that is completely lacking here, is the fact that a lot of our communities right now, we just don't really, there just really isn't a focus on getting folks to actually do this,
Right.
It really is there.
To do this by you mean like getting these benefits, to push for these benefits?
Exactly, to push for actual forms of action which make a concrete difference in trans people and queer people's lives.
Right.
Same goes for hiring trans and queer people, actually taking action for that. I'm wondering, how many corporations will actually show up at Pride, will happily, not just hire trans people, but also, promote them and give them career advancement opportunities and give them the means to be able to better thrive in society. I'm also thinking about how, a lot of them, they might just show up at Pride, yet, do nothing else.
Right. It's a photo op.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm thinking too, what about the broader commitment to human rights as well? I think that's where a lot of the critique of pinkwashing comes in, because one of the big reasons why we have had Wild Pride this year is primarily because of Montreal Pride's complete refusal to say anything about the genocide in Gaza, which I'm not afraid to name here because it is absolutely factually proven that it is a genocide by all sorts of international bodies. And there's if you've seen the photos, you cannot deny it. I'll say that way.
Of course. That's exactly what I wanted to get into next. So thank you for bringing that up. But I think before we get into this kind of topic, can you explain pinkwashing for the audience?
It's when people, use queer issues in an attempt to distract from, for example, other human rights violations, or attempts to sanitize a certain record, or to just make yourselves look better, So I'll give an example, which would be the State of Israel's marketing campaigns towards gay people starting in the 2000s of, pinkwashing Israel as like the safest place for gay people in the Middle East.
Right, yeah. That's a line you often hear where I feel like people are like, when they see, I feel like specifically when people who are pro-Israel see like queer people protesting for Palestine, they'll say you wouldn't even survive in Palestine.
Yeah, when I'd argue, so much of this, so much of violence against queer people in Palestine, at least historically, I'm not sure about it now, but historically it's been Israeli IOF officers blackmailing gay and queer Palestinians into ratting out their communities. It's so much of it is, specifically using gayness, queerness as a weapon in order to attack,
gain leverage over them.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, so we started talking about this, but like, there's a lot of conversation and a lot of stuff that's still developing, right, around Fierté and their refusal to kind of like name the genocide what it is, but then calling it genocide, but then revoking two groups from coming, but then allowing them to come on. I think you just told us today, like someone stepped down from Fierté. So clearly there's a huge kind of like
there's been
issue.
Exactly, and like Montreal Pride, it seems like the organization's been having some turmoil lately, most notably with their board president who has resigned for personal reasons a couple weeks ago, and their executive director stepping down just according to the Devoir yesterday.
So I guess to start off, like I guess can you tell me about like I guess the series of events that's kind of like precipitated this kind of resignation?
Absolutely. So I think for this we need to step back until long ago. So like I'm not sure if it was late 2023 or early 2024 when like different queer Arab groups started really pushing on Fierté MTL to actually start taking a position against the genocide in Palestine. And amongst those groups, I'll name most notably Halam Montréal, Moubadat, Independent Jewish Voices, Voix Juive Indépendante, and the Collectif Consenti, back then named the CAX de l'Ouest de l'Île de Montréal. So you have a lot of these groups which were actively, just trying to have civil conversation with Montreal Pride to hopefully get them to recognize there's a genocide in Palestine and start taking actions in solidarity with them. And that ended up, going nowhere. And last year, in fact, there's a bunch of queer protesters who interrupted Montreal Pride, and they got brutalized by the police. Yeah, photos of that, videos of that, of course. So, to no one's surprise,
we see the same dynamic playing out.
Yeah. And then they've never excused themselves for the police brutality, which has happened at Montreal Pride proper. Never excused themselves for, saying, I'd argue, extremely hurtful things. And I was in at least one video call with like one Zoom call where Montreal Pride was trying to explain itself to the community after, different artist groups started, calling out Fierté Montréal for poor working conditions, which is, I'd argue, a very similar issue. I was also made aware of like different abusive contracts with Montreal Pride, which I've also been able to comment on as like something that is just blatantly abusive, and just overall seeing how Montreal Pride has some, claims that it is, using the money it gets from like, for example, alcohol sales, etc., to like be able to offer community projects and grants to community. Yeah, sure, I feel like the means they're doing so is by pushing artists into poverty under the guise of, this being one of the main opportunities to be visible as queer persons, So definitely a lot of that. And some of these meetings I've seen, it was genuinely traumatizing to be in. Most notably, I'm remembering one called in like late May, which was rescheduled with pretty much no notice. And I was just casually listening to it while I remember like pretty precisely. I was like driving down La Route Saint-André vers Gaspé that day.
Nice.
And just I was listening to the call through Bluetooth and heard so many of my comrades, voices just speaking up against what is going on. And it was basically Montreal Pride trying to, excuse itself from everything, trying to pretend that it is because it is a festival and it's not because it is a festival, it cannot speak up about political issues. Yet the festival is named Montreal Pride Festival. Like seriously, Pride is political.
Right.
A festival is apolitical. How contradictory is that?
Right.
And that's the thing, fundamentally, with Montreal Pride, is that it tries to be an apolitical structure when queerness, and especially transness nowadays, is inherently political by definition. It's trying to exist within a space which does not exist anymore. And that is exactly what's led us to World Pride being created this year by so many of these same comrades who were first speaking up for Palestine in late 2023, early 2024. And really that has led to, I would argue, one of the best created citizen-led just Pride festivals ever in Montreal. 300 times less budget than Montreal Pride.
Wow. That's cost efficient. I'd say cost efficient, and it seems morally
very
just.
like apparently Montreal Pride. Like I remember, like for the festival, their parade. I believe I'm not sure if I'm confusing the numbers here. But I remember like between the community days and the festival in like 2022. No, the parade and the community days, it was either 50,000 or 150,000, like one or the other. I'm not sure which one's which. I forgot. It was because their finances were revealed that year because the city of Montreal did like an audit after the Pride Parade was canceled that year. That was fun. And we had that. We had some figures from just how much money they're spending in that. And I argue this year, the World Pride March, which had probably just as much attendance as which probably had almost as much attendance as like the official Pride Parade this year, has been organized on maybe $2,000 or $3,000 worth of budget.
I think it shows a lot about like I guess the appetite for this kind of like for a pride that's not afraid to be political, for a pride that's sort of like not like just this kind of like just a party, it's like
absolutely. And also, when it is a party, to make sure it is inclusive of the folks who've been, excluded by Montreal Pride. And of that, I'm speaking specifically about lesbo queer communities in particular, as well as like trans and QT BIPOC communities as well, because those folk have been so blatantly excluded from Montreal Pride. I'm speaking as a member of all three of them. I'm a dyke, trans one, and an East Asian person. And you cannot separate any one part of that
right, of course,
from, who I am. Same goes for so many other folks I know who are like, for instance, queer Arabs, queer Palestinians, people who have been completely traumatized by Montreal Pride.
Right, yeah. On multiple levels, yeah. Yeah, no, it's heartening to hear that there's these alternatives forming. I think it's always this incredible thing.
It is.
I mean, to me, like Fierté is like, after what you've told me, it sounds like this nexus for so many overlapping things, right? With it, you have this sort of like neoliberal corporatism, this thing that wants to be like, hey, we support the marginalized, but like that's mostly kind of like just purely surface level.
And I'd argue like this model is completely falling apart, in particular in 2025, a context in which, corporate equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives are being completely axed by, a hostile environment.
Right.
I've seen, for example, different corporations, not just in the US, but a bit all across the world, just trying to roll back their equity, diversity, and inclusion policies.
Yeah. As soon as
for
Trump
the
was
sake
elected,
of, appeasing others. Or seeing different platforms, like, for example, I'm going to name in particular Meta, which includes Facebook and Instagram, LinkedIn, and different other, social media platforms, purposely repealing protections for trans people for the sake of appeasing people,
right,
appeasing the U.S.'s new dictator.
Right.
We've seen, and many of these impacts are being felt here as well, where blatant charter violations are being, I'm documenting blatant charter violations, like, for example, for example, trans and non-binary Canadians can no longer apply for Nexus card
Right.
because of Executive Order 14168 in the United States, which is a blatant violation of Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, yet is considered also a foreign policy issue at the same time, which the Canadian government has done nothing to address.
No, yeah. So it's like I feel like the liberal government is always talking about how they're like, very pro queer, LGBTQIA.
Then do something.
No, exactly.
So people coming here as international students from the US, or like coming here under work visas,
Right.
coming here under family reunification or marriage, or different other grounds, or even just who might have had citizenship by descent, like from previous generations who might never have stepped into Canada except for vacation, now moving to Canada, moving to Quebec amongst other places, because it is so damn unsafe to be trans or queer in the US anymore.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah, like we're talking about like hundreds, thousands of people who are like that now. And that's without counting the hundreds of thousands of internally displaced trans people in the US right now. It is a genuine refugee crisis, orchestrated entirely by bigotry.
Right. Yeah. How do you see that kind of? I'm curious. What are ways that you've seen that kind of like those kinds of politics that subjugates trans and non-binary people from the U.S. kind of? Have you seen that creep into Canadian context?
Oh, absolutely. Now, it's something I basically documented in pretty much all Canadian provinces, west, like New Brunswick and westwards. So by that, I mean, for example, there's been book bans, introduced in Alberta, proposed in BC, gender affirming caravans, passed and now enjoined by court in Alberta. There's different, bills, etc., trying to prevent trans youth from using their chosen names in schools, currently active in Alberta and Saskatchewan, former one in New Brunswick. There's now, it's also been proposed in Manitoba as well. There's been attempts at introducing so-called like parental rights legislation, which does not exist in Canadian law, does not exist in the Canadian Charter, in like so many different Canadian provinces. There's been anti-trans protests in all 10 Canadian provinces and a bit everywhere else, even in the north as well. So we're talking about like a globalized phenomenon of anti-trans hatred taking up shit ton of space. I'm also documenting most notably in Quebec uses of pseudoscience in an attempt to justify further anti-trans policy.
Uses of absolute
Pseudoscience.
Pseudoscience. Okay.
And I know like there's a researchers, quote unquote, in Ontario who are doing the same, who are affiliated with foreign anti-trans groups such as the so-called Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, in a U.S. Southern Poverty Law Center designated hate group specialized in spewing disinformation about trans people and advocating for gender affirming care bans. And in Quebec more recently, a new directive forcing trans women into men's prisons unless they've had gender affirming surgery.
Yeah, so the creep of that kind of bigotry is absolutely here. And I guess to bring it back to Fierté, it's like with this
They said nothing about it.
Exactly.
They've said absolutely nothing when we had the first anti-trans protest, back then disguised as anti-drag protests in April 2023. They said nothing when we had those massive anti-trans protests back in September 2023. They said nothing when like anti-trans bills were being introduced in other Canadian provinces. They said nothing when the Quebec's Minister of Public Security decided to throw trans women into men's prisons, which there's already been cases of that happening now. They've said nothing about that. They sure may put demands on their website. Sure may put like unofficial demands that official demands that they'll present during the Pride Parade and all that. But they're gonna do nothing about it. They're not gonna actually push forward those demands.
Right. It's not. It's just a loose demand if you're not actively organizing for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well. What should happen to Fierté?
Honestly, at this point, I'm tempted to say it needs to be completely rebuilt from the ground up.
Okay.
It needs to be completely rebuilt, whether under the same name or a different name. Because unfortunately, Montreal Pride now no longer has the trust of vast swaths of Montreal's queer community, especially trans community as well, and really needs to, I'll say, desperate reform potentially up to and including just having the org be completely rebooted from zero for change to actually happen. We do need pride, and that's something I'm going to say. I know a lot of folks out there, especially like so many folks say we need pride and we don't want it to get crushed by like quote unquote pro-Palestine activists, end quote. And we've seen like a lot of like media outlets trying to just puppet this official narrative of pride needs to be like about inclusion at all costs, no matter the human rights implications thereof. We've had external politicians, cisgender straight politicians trying to dictate what pride should be. It's not up to them.
Right. Yeah.
It's up to the community to decide. At this point, what community wants is a politicized, political pride focused on advocating for human rights.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Celeste, for coming on.
It is such a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, that was Celeste Trianon coming on to talk about Fierté MTL, the violence at Rad Pride, the success of Wild Pride,
Yeah.
and the current context for many queer communities here in Montreal and Quebec. It is a concerning one, but you have to have pride. Oh, one last question: should pride be a party or a riot?
Why can't it be both?
There you go, folks.
Because
Thank
that's
you.
what we need. That's what we need. We cannot just have I mean, we'll of course say pride was a riot, pride is a riot. That's of course what we say at protests. It is supposed to be, it is supposed to be a human rights movement. Yet you cannot just abandon the fun in there as well.
No, of course. Yeah.
It should also be a time for folks to meet each other, to connect with each other, to actually just rebuild bridges that have been, left abandoned for years. That's what pride's about.
There you go.
It should not just be about having fun. It should be about building community.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Celeste, again for coming on. This has been an enlightening experience. It's always nice having you on talking about these issues.
Such a pleasure. Hope you have an amazing one.
Thank you so much. And thank you, viewer and or listener, for tuning in. Take care of yourselves.